Hello and welcome to today's video where we will be showing you how to install the Motoklik TW 1.0 system on KTM, Husqvarna and GasGas models. My name is Jens Kotka, I'm the founder of Motoklik, and I'd personally like to say thank you very much for purchasing your unit. I really hope you like it, and I'm sure we'll be giving you the data and information you need to ride with maximum confidence on your bike. In today's video we're going to be covering what's in this box, what tools you'll need to fit the Motoklik system, and then how it is laid out onto the bike. We'll be starting by covering how to fit the rear suspension sensor and rear magnet holder, the power supply cable, the front suspension wand, the handlebar controller and the central control unit, which sits up here just behind the front number plate. Before I continue, I'd like to say a special thank you for CCM Racing for the loan of this magnificent GasGas MC450F, and also to the team here at Works helping to put this video together. The Motoklik kit includes everything needed to secure the system to your motorcycle. This includes long cable ties for securing the handlebar controller, medium length cable ties for securing the front and rear suspension sensors, and shorter cable ties for securing any excess cabling that's left around the motorcycle's frame or behind the front number plate. The system includes a handlebar controller which has an LED indicator button, the front suspension sensor wand, the rear suspension sensor pack, the central control unit and accompanying Velcro pads used to secure the unit to the back of the front number plate. And please be careful when handling the front and rear magnet holders, which already have a strong magnet inserted into them. Also included is the Motoklik wear band used to secure the front suspension wand, the power supply cable, and an optional high-speed adjuster for the rear compression on your rear shock. In order to fit the Motoklik system, the tools you will need are an 8 and 10mm 1/4" drive socket with extension and T-bar. You will also need a 3/8" drive 10mm socket with extension and ratchet, a 17mm 1/2" drive socket with ratchet, snips, insulation tape, a flat screwdriver, and a torque wrench with a minimum of 12 Nm setting. Okay, the first thing we're going to do when we get started is to move the tank up out of the way. Now we don't need to remove the tank completely, the fuel line can remain connected, but we just need to move it up as such so that we can route the rear suspension cable and the power supply cable in along the frame of the bike, so it's got that real OEM look. It's a pretty simple process and it's easy to do when you know how, but if you don't, you can follow this link here and it will bring you to another YouTube video showing you how to remove the tank. We're going to get started, however, by removing the saddle, which requires these two 8mm bolts to be removed here. We're going to then remove the 2 bolts from the left radiator, 2 bolts from the right radiator, 1 central bolt holding the tank on here, and then remove the fuel pump clip also. So let's get started. You can prepare the rear magnet holder by sliding a medium length cable tie through the location slot on the front of the magnet holder, and you can also prepare the rear sensor by sliding medium length cable ties through the locations at the top and bottom of the sensor pack. To install the rear suspension sensor pack and the rear magnet holder, begin by removing any frame guard from the motorcycle. With the standard frame guard, you simply have to snip away the securing cable tie that's around the brake master cylinder and undo the size 8mm bolt. You can then move on to removing the brake line from the brake line clamp using your flat screwdriver. With the brake line removed, you can then use your size 8mm socket to remove the 2 size 8mm securing bolts that are used to hold the brake line clamp in place on the swing. Identify the two bolt holes in the swing arm, and we will be attaching the rear magnet holder to the forwardmost bolt hole. Slide the cable tie through the rear magnet holder and slide the cable tie underneath the brake line and around the swing arm. You can then secure it loosely. Line the rear magnet holder up so that the hole in the flange is above the hole for the frontmost securing bolt that holds the brake line clamp into position. This bolt will pass through the brake line clamp through the hole in the rear magnet holder and then thread down into the swing arm. Position the brake line clamp in place and begin by threading the forwardmost bolt through the brake line clamp, through the magnet holder and into the swing arm. Take your time with this procedure so as not to cross-thread any of the bolts into the swing arm. Also secure the rear bolt again, which is the one closest to the rear tyre. Once the bolts are tightened, you can then tighten the cable tie fully and remove any excess material with the snips. Press the brake line back into the brake line clamp so that it is secure. The next step will be to place the rear sensor pack onto the master cylinder. If you're going to be using the frame guard, you may need to trim away any excess material that could press against the rear sensor and cause you to have an incorrect rear suspension millimeter position measurement. So when the rear frame guard is in place, it shouldn't be touching the rear sensor pack. Position the rear sensor pack in place and slide the bottom cable tie through, around the master cylinder and back between the frame and the master cylinder. This cable tie can then be secured completely. You can then insert the top cable tie. However, if you're doing this with the frame guard, position the frame guard in place first. Try to loop the rear sensor cable down and secure it with the cable tie so that if the cable is pulled, it won't pull the sensor out of the rear sensor pack. Here, the cable is routed just behind the master cylinder with a small loop going down into the sensor pack. The cable is then led up along the outside of the frame to keep it away from the exhaust heat so that the cable isn't melted during use. Tighten and trim away any excess material from the cable ties. You can then route the cable up through the spine of the frame of the motorcycle, which is underneath the tank. You should see the OEM cable assembly already routed along here. The idea is to route the rear suspension sensor cable alongside this cable assembly. There are two rubber hoops used to secure the cable bunch in place, so slide the Motoklik rear suspension sensor cable inside these rubber hoops. In this view, the rear suspension sensor cable is now secured in place using these rubber bands or rubber hoops. Feed the Motoklik rear suspension sensor cable up above the radiator. You can now secure the loose suspension sensor with the small cable ties. This will ensure that while riding, the cable won't come loose and rub against your boot and be pulled out of position. Trim away any excess from the cable ties after tightening. You can then pull the rear suspension sensor cable slightly to take up any slack and again to ensure that the cable won't touch off the exhaust during use. You can feed the rear suspension sensor cable inside the breather hose beside the frame before removing the front number plate from the motorcycle. Remove the front number plate using the size 8mm bolt and feed the rear suspension sensor cable in above the bottom triple clamp so that it is between both of the triple clamps and between the frame and the right fork leg. We are now going to install the Motoklik power supply cable. This attaches to the 6-pin connector which is located on the back of the OEM ECU. Ensure that the 6-pin connector clips into place and find a place for the connector and the Motoklik fuse to fit so that it does not obstruct any other part of the cable assembly. You can then place the Motoklik power supply cable underneath the OEM ECU by lifting it slightly and then securing it back in position using the rubber tab. Feed the power supply cable alongside the rest of the OEM cable bundle in underneath the frame, and then you can follow the frame along the same as with the rear suspension sensor cable, passing the power supply cable through the rubber tabs that are used to secure the OEM cable bundle. Ensure that the fuse holder and that the Motoklik connector are placed away properly in the subframe. After the cable has been routed along the frame in underneath the tank, we can then clip it in with the rest of the cable bundle to the left of the headstock. Pass the Motoklik power supply cable between the triple clamps and between the headstock and the left fork leg. Reattach the petrol tank and saddle and be sure to plug back in the fuel pump connector that was disconnected during the disassembly process. At this point we now have our rear suspension sensor and our rear magnet holder in place down at the swing arm. We've also put the tank back in place and put the saddle back on. So at this point the two cables are hanging out through the front triple clamps, and the next part of the video that we will move to is fitting the front sensor wand. But I think we deserve one little treat just before then, don't you? You want to have a jelly with me? The next part of the installation process is to fit the front sensor wand to the fork leg. Now the front sensor wand is different from the standard Exact or WPAER 48 suspension compared to the Exact Pro or the cone valve suspension, so make sure that the part number listed on the side of the sensor wand is correct for the type of suspension that you're fitting it to. One thing that we will have to do in order to fit the sensor wand properly is replace the OEM wear band with our own Motoklik wear band. And this has a small slot in it which holds the front sensor wand in place so that the front sensor wand doesn't rotate around the fork leg when it's in position. In order to fit this front sensor wear band, we actually have to remove the fork leg completely, so we'll be loosening the bottom and top triple clamp bolts as well as removing the front wheel and the brake line and the brake caliper here on the front. And we'll be bringing you through the procedure on how to do that. There are a couple of things I want to warn you about in this procedure though, and that's when you're reinstalling the brake caliper, make sure the brake pads are contacting the disc in the correct orientation so that the meat of the pads is against the disc, and also that you're using the correct torque specification to hold the brake caliper bolts in position. We'll also be bringing you through the correct procedure on how to refit the front axle with the wheel in place. So that's to make sure that your forks are parallel to one another and that you have the axle held in the right position also. One final thing I'm going to point out to you is that the KTM GasGas and the Husqvarna front magnet holders are slightly different, and you have to pay attention to the bottom surface here. You can see for KTM and GasGas it's kind of like more of a diamond shape. On the Husqvarna it's flatter on the bottom here, and also there's a part number inscribed on the inside here. If your part number begins with H, it's for Husqvarna. If it begins with KG, it's for KTM and GasGas, and the front brake magnet holder will be sit here as a replacement for the standard brake line clamp that's on the bike. We can then begin to remove the front fork leg. Start by removing the brake line clamp, then loosen the brake master cylinder bolts, loosen the main axle nut and the pinch bolts on either fork lug, and remove the front wheel. With the front wheel removed, pay special attention to the height of the fork leg, as we'll want to reinstall it with the exact same height. You can then continue to loosen the brake caliper completely and remove it from the fork leg. You can also remove the fork guard so that we have access to the original wear band, so that it makes it easier to remove. Loosen the top and bottom triple clamp bolts and carefully slide the fork leg out from the triple clamps. Wrap some insulation tape around your flat screwdriver so that you can protect the fork leg as you pry away the OEM wear band from the outer fork tube. Take care and take your time doing this so as not to scratch the outer fork tube. Once you have the tongs pried away slightly, you can begin to tap the OEM wear band away and it will lift off from the outer fork tube. Rotate the fork tube as you tap so that you make sure that the pressure is applied evenly around the wear band. Once the OEM wear band is removed, you can slide the Motoklik wear band in place, making sure that the tabs are sticking upwards, and try to have them at a 90-degree angle to the clicker adjusters on the top of the fork cap. The Motoklik wear band will slide down into position and pop into place once it's in the correct position on the fork tube. Make sure that it pops into place all the way around the outer fork tube, and simple as that, the wear band is in position. You can then continue on to putting the fork leg back into the triple clamps, and be sure to position it at the correct height that you noted when taking out the fork leg. This height should be the same on either fork. Pinch the triple clamp bolts into place to secure the fork leg before using the correct torque specification to secure them in place. Reattach the fork guard. You can then move on to reinstalling the front wheel. To install the front wheel correctly, slide the axle through into position and slide on the main axle nut. You can then reposition the brake caliper and thread in the brake caliper bolts. It's very important to ensure that the forks are parallel, so the right fork lug should float on the axle. Begin by fully tightening the main axle nut by putting a 17mm spanner on the throttle side and using the 17mm ratchet on the brake side. Pinch the nut secure. Once you have that done, you can then pinch the lug nuts on the brake side. With the wheel facing directly forward, spin the wheel as fast as you can and grab the front brake so that it comes to a sudden stop. Repeat this a number of times so that you ensure that the forks are parallel to each other and that the axle is in the correct position in the fork lugs. You can then pinch the throttle side fork lug bolts. Ensure that the brake caliper bolts and the fork lug bolts are all torqued to the correct specification, as well as double checking the triple clamp bolts that are also torqued to the correct specification. Once you have this procedure complete, the wheel should rotate freely on the axle. Prepare the front sensor wand by sliding the medium length cable ties through the holes in the wand. To install the front suspension sensor wand, start by inserting the medium length cable ties through the wand itself. You can then wrap the cable ties around the fork leg, but be sure that the cable ties are not pinching the brake line to the fork leg. Secure them loosely in position before sliding the suspension sensor wand into the wear band and making sure that it's inserted fully and bottomed out against the wear band. Also make sure that the front suspension sensor wand is parallel to the movement of the fork and not that it's twisted around to one of the sides at the top. Tighten the cable ties and remove any excess with the snips before using a third medium length cable tie to secure the front suspension sensor cable in position just above the bottom triple clamp. Again, tighten the cable tie and remove any excess with the You can then attach the front magnet holder by making sure the brake line is correctly positioned in the fork guard, and using the two screws, clamp the brake line into position using the front magnet holder. Tighten the bolts fully, but be sure not to over tighten them as the plastic can be quite weak in the fork guard. The correct position of the magnet is not directly above the sensor wand, but slightly to the side. Here you can see how the center line of the magnet is to the left of the sensor wand, and there is also a guide line in the wear band where the center of the magnet should be positioned directly above. Well done on getting through that chapter, and by this stage now we should have the front suspension sensor wand fitted to the outside of the brake side fork leg. We have our new wear guide in here, the Motoklik black one that's used to align the sensor wand, and we have our front magnet holder attached as well. And I hope the process of putting the front wheel back on for you went pretty easy too. If you followed our guidelines, they should be nice and parallel and all the bolts are tightened up properly. And you might want to just give one more check here again to make sure that your fork height is right and that it's at the same height as the opposite side of the triple clamp. We'll also have 3 cables hanging out from behind the front number plate at the moment. One will be the power cable, the rear suspension sensor cable, and the front suspension sensor cable. So in the next chapter what we're going to do is we're going to fit the handlebar controller up here, and then we're also going to fit the Motoklik central control unit to the back of the front number plate. So the good news is you've done the hardest work already. But I think it's time for another jelly. Prepare the handlebar controller by sliding the longest length cable ties through the allocated slots at either side of the controller. Place the controller on the bar pad and place each of the cable ties to either side of one of the bar mounts underneath the bar pad. Tighten the cable ties and trim away any excess. It's best that this controller is parallel with the ground and faces upwards towards the sky, with as little impeding it and the signal from the satellite as much as possible. Route the sensor cable underneath the bar pad and leave it hang out in front of the triple clamps. You now have 4 cables hanging at the front of the triple clamps: the power cable and handlebar controller cable, front suspension sensor cable and rear suspension sensor cable. Get your central control unit, and you can see there's a square, triangle, circle and lightning bolt symbol on the front face. The lightning bolt is for the power supply cable, the circle is for the handlebar controller, the triangle is for the front suspension sensor cable, and the square is for the rear suspension sensor cable. We can now attach the Velcro pad to the back of the central control unit and also to the back of the front number plate. Remove the plastic backing from the Velcro pad and stick it centrally on the back of the central control unit. And remove the plastic backing completely from the other Velcro pad and stick it centrally on the back of the front number plate. With the front number plate in position, you can then secure the central control unit to the Velcro pad and use the smaller cable ties to tidy away any excess cable that might be left from the Motoklik system. Secure the front number plate with the size 8mm bolt. Good news! Your Motoklik TW 1.0 system should now be fully installed on your motorcycle, provided you followed all the instructions as we said throughout this installation video. So the last thing we did here was put the central control unit in behind the front number plate with the Velcro pad and connected all of the connectors. Remember, it was the square for the back one, triangle for the front, circle for the handlebar controller and a little lightning bolt for the power supply cable. Now, before you go off and start tearing around your local track or whatever, trying to get the most out of this day and beat lap times and all that kind of stuff, check again. The throttle, it snaps shut when the handlebar is turned in both directions. Your front and your rear brake are working properly, and to make sure that the front magnet is aligned properly with the front suspension wand and that the front suspension wand is nice and parallel with the downward direction of the fork here. So hopefully you found this installation not too troublesome and it went okay for you. If you have any feedback for us and what you think we could improve or what you'd like to see done better, or if you have any questions at all, you can write them in the comments down below and we'll be sure to get back to you. But other than that, it's time for some motos and maybe even some more jellies. What do you think? Will we finish the pack of jellies? I think so. I think we deserve it. Anyway, if you have any more questions for us, you can find us on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. Visit our website motoklik.com and we'll be glad to help you out where we can. Thank you and best of luck with your riding.